Yeah. So, Mark, I think I've made you a co-host, and do you want to take us on from here for the next half hour or so?
Yes, let me try and find the right screen.
That's okay. One thing I might flag up while I'm doing it, if I turn my camera off, I get a stiff back, so sometimes I just get up and move around a bit. So to prevent distraction, if you see me turn my camera off, it's just so that I'm not wandering around on your screens and distracting you.
I turned mine off because my husband brought me a drink and he doesn't like being on screen.
All right. I was in a meeting the other day, and my wife brought me a drink, and she kissed me on the forehead while I was in it. So that
Oh, that's nice. Oh, bless.
bonus, the top of the head you gives me, bonus for the rest of the meeting. But anyway,
Love her.
there you go, Mark. I can see that. That's fine.
Great. Just move all the other bits out of the way and then I can see it as well. So it'll be good, just as I'm talking through, to think a little bit about the funerals that you've been to and see whether anything of what I say sort of resonates with your experiences, or you can sort of understand what I'm saying, sort of being illustrated in some ways by those funerals that you've been to. So, looking at ritual, liturgy, rites of passage. So, what is ritual? So, the Cambridge Dictionary describes ritual as a way of doing something in which the same actions are done in the same way every time. Most dictionary definitions are along those lines. They refer to a series of actions performed according to a prescribed order. It's often linked to religious or solemn ceremony, but that's not always the case. Roy Rappaport, who is an anthropologist who I will return to um, later, he uses this definition. He says that ritual is the performance of more or less invariant sequences of formal acts and utterances, not entirely encoded by the performers. Now, that's an academic definition if I've ever heard of one. But I invite you just to think back to the death of Queen Elizabeth and the proclaiming of Charles as king a few years ago. I don't know if you sort of watch stuff on television, but particularly with the proclamation, I remember seeing images of people in all sorts of different cities and towns carrying out very similar things. So we had series of acts and utterances being performed according to a prescribed order, where the performer, that's the person who was carrying out the ritual, had not created, they hadn't, that's the encoded from that definition. They hadn't encoded it themselves, but were using a form that had been handed to them to use.
Yeah.
In talking about ritual having a form, um, Rappaport here is meaning that it has a form that is followed. When he says, sorry, about formal acts, he's saying it has a form that's followed rather than it necessarily being formal. So he talks about the greeting behavior of teenagers in saying that it has a form and that it's, or is formal being stereotyped quite often, but that's not necessarily solemn or restrained in a way. We could perhaps think also about the way that you see sports people celebrate, often following the same sort of pattern, even if it's a fist bump or something like that, as an example there. This then is a slightly different way of thinking about ritual, and this comes from Ronald Grimes. So he defines ritual as sequences of ordinary action rendered special by virtue of their condensation, elevation, or stylization. What he's basically saying is that as well as being done in a particular way, following that form, for something to be ritual, those actions need to be made special or strange in some ways. This is because rituals are effectively made up of normal everyday acts. Again, think back to the proclamation of Charles as king. It's normal for people to say things. It's also relatively normal for people to say things in public, but something particular was happening. So he gives the example of two people talking to each other who you cannot see. We do that all the time over a telephone, etc. That's not a ritual. But then he talks about how, by its elevation or stylization, a person praying to someone, a god that they cannot see, makes that a ritual because it becomes special. Similarly, he talks about people washing themselves or bathing. It's just a good thing. It's a good habit to have in society. My youngest son is 11 and hasn't quite realized that, so we have to sort of try and persuade him to go and shower ever so often. But again, when you do that in a particular way, with people being immersed in water while calling on invisible presence, then it becomes a ritual. Obviously, we can think of baptism within Christian circles, but there will be other rituals that use water in most other religions. And then a last way to think about it, which picks up that idea of a normal action being made special or strange, is that the actions or the series of actions cannot be justified by a rational means to an end type of explanation. So in this sense, the custom of shaking hands is a greeting, becomes a ritual, but the act of planting potatoes with a view to harvest is not, because shaking hands is forming something. There is something going on beyond just the greeting. That, of course, doesn't mean that potatoes might not be planted in a particularly ritualistic way with the hope of producing a better harvest. I've not managed that with the potatoes I've planted yet, but we can see next year. This then is, again, a slightly different way. This is an extract from a podcast called The Next Right Thing. And it's someone called Emily P. Freeman. And I'm just going to read a bit from the transcript because it's easier than trying to play. And she's talking about what she says, what's saving my life right now, the things that she's doing that are help keeping her going. And as one of those, she describes what she terms as her morning liturgy, which she says is a fancy way of saying my morning routine. And she describes it along this way. She says, of course, sometimes it doesn't go as planned, but for the most part, every morning it involves coffee and breakfast, conversation with John, a little prayer, a little writing, and some reading. This is the rhythm that I tend to do in a particular order. Now, it's a very small thing, but for breakfast, I've started eating 2 hard-boiled eggs for breakfast each day. For months, I've been doing this. Maybe just because, again, it's a kind of part of my morning liturgy of waking up to the day and entering into the day. But having those 2 eggs has become important. While they boil, I do a little Wordle. Of course I do. And there's just something really life-affirming about beginning my day in this way. Now, it all goes south when the Wordle takes me 40 minutes to finish. Let's not talk about that. But for the most part, this little routine that happens every morning is saving my life. And I think, again, we can see how it could be understood as a ritual. She's doing those same things every day, and it has become something that actually helps sustain her, helps her maintain her life. And I will return to that again in a little bit. So if that's how we sort of define ritual, how do we understand the point of ritual? So Rappaport, who I mentioned earlier, he argues that ritual is a form of communication. He suggests that ritual is not simply an alternative way to express any manner of things, but that certain meaning and effects can best or even only be expressed or achieved in ritual. Developing that, he argues that ritual's efficacy may be understood as physical through the deployment of matter and energy, or meaningful, grounded in principles of communication. In one of what is my favorite quotes from his writing, he says, "To distinguish between the domains in which the physical and meaningful prevail is not to declare that the boundary between them is sharp or clear." He says, "It is unlikely that any sea has ever been parted by prayer or turned back by command. And we may be equally confident that no prince has ever been transformed into a king, no man and woman into husband and wife by matter and energy alone. But prayer, as well as drugs, may have an effect upon the physical well-being of those praying, and even upon the health of those for whose sake prayers are offered." From an anthropological perspective, there is a debate about the exact nature of ritual and how much of it we can really understand. There is, though, quite a lot of consensus regarding its role in sort of pastoral situations. Douglas Davis asserts that rather than being a code to be cracked for meaning, ritual is something that's performed as an end in itself. He says its meaning lies in the very act of performance. Another pastoral anthropologist, Elaine Ramshaw, argues that one of the functions of ritual in that pastoral context is to reaffirm meaning and purpose at times of transition or tragedy. I think that understanding that ritual helps us communicate meaning, particularly in situations where we struggle to find appropriate words, is echoed in other writing. Herbert Anderson and Edward Foley have an excellent little book called I've now forgotten what the title of the book is. I'll come back to that. But in the book, they describe ritual and narrative, and they say to be human is to ritualize the human narrative. And ritual, they suggest, is the way that we access and enter the human story. They also see the performance of ritual as integral. They say ritual is embodied expression. And I think lots of those sort of trends of thinking can be are summed up well by Ewan Kelly's description, where he says ritual is a mechanism by which people's wrestlings and searchings and struggling can be verbalized and validated by an other or others and acted out by some, if not all. I will pause there to see if there are any questions about what I've said before moving on to a little bit about rites of passage. Or if anyone's got any comments, just sort of shout out.
I was just trying to think of examples of ritual in the funeral service. Is there things that come to mind there that we would count as a ritual?
Well, I was just going to say it came to mind from the last session when we were talking about how comforting the Lord's Prayer is. That saying the Lord's Prayer is basically a ritual that most people in this country are aware of. It's something that, I'd almost say for me, I think a ritual is something that you don't necessarily have to think about as well. Sometimes that's when it becomes the ritual. It's something that it's that bit. It's so ingrained.
Yeah, and there's certainly people talk about sort of ritualized behavior and sort of habits formed by repeating things over. And I think a funeral service is in itself a ritual. And then it would have sort of particular aspects of ritual or more sort of ritual action within it. So depending on sort of the traditions that you might be in, sprinkling a coffin with water would be one aspect of that. But there would be just a funeral, I say, in of itself, it is a ritual because it's doing something, and that's what we'll sort of move on to in terms of transitions and what it's seeking to achieve. So I will carry on. So that a little bit about rites of passage and liminality. So it's been an interesting discussion to have with anthropologists. I think they would probably say that not all rituals are rites of passage, but that all rites of passage are rituals. Rites of passage have a particular focus with transitions, often related to a transition from one social or life stage to another. Obviously, in that sense, funerals fit into that category. But we might think of the traditional occasional offices of a church of baptism, marriage, and funerals, the hatch, match, and dispatch. Each area has each one. There is a transition that is happening. It's someone becoming incorporated into the community of faith. We've got the bringing together of a couple into husband and wife, and obviously in a funeral. And this will be something to think a bit more about, and we'll sort of touch on. We've got the transition of someone into whatever happens after death. So they're being transferred into another state. And then there's also the question of what's actually happening for those who are attending the funeral. Are they as much as the part of that process? So Timothy Jenkins, who is a priest and an anthropologist, he describes ritual states as being often to do with transition. They are there to help forge a new sense of purpose or duty or status. And if we go back to those quotes that from Emily Freeman and her morning routine, I think you could understand it as a rite of passage. It's what's helping her transition into each new day. Issues around new social or life stages and the related duties are also very clearly at play in the rites that pertained to the death of the Queen, the proclamation of Charles as king, and then his installation later on as well. If we particularly though think about funeral ministries, and obviously we're looking at the structure of funerals in the second part of today's session, but I think it is that interesting question of thinking about who in a funeral service is having their status changed, who is going through a transition, and ultimately in that sense, who is a funeral for is a really interesting question. So rites of passage are generally described as having a threefold structure. And this is the sort of, I suppose, the deep structure of ritual that ritual draws on. Whenever we're creating new ones, they still link back to the sort of deeper underlying patterns. And that notion of a deep structure is normally traced back to the work of the anthropologist Arnold van Gennep. So he argues that there was this threefold pattern behind the range of human rituals that he studied. He talked about how they accompany a passage from one situation to another, or from one cosmic or social world to another. He used the Latin term limen, meaning threshold. And I guess if you think of how we walk through a doorway, and we talk about it as the sort of threshold, the liminal place in that way. So that's that idea of moving through into different places. So he says that rites of passage have a preliminal stage, which he terms of rites of separation, liminal rites, which is the rites of transition, and then the post-liminal, which he talks about rites of incorporation. So the sort of idea that someone is separated from the status they were in, they then go through this time of transition, and then they're reincorporated back into society or back into wherever they are in this new status. Although lots of people would say that actually, rather than just the liminal rites being termed rites of transition, really the whole lot might be thought of as rites of transition, because transition is key within all of what's happening. And as I've sort of suggested, actually transition might be quite key in ritual itself. Although any rite of passage will have all three stages, normally one part will have sort of greater importance. And Van Gennep argued that the liminal rites are dominant within funeral liturgy and ritual. He talks about the liminal stage often being characterized by a suspension of normal social norms, a feeling of being in a void or in a desert. And another anthropologist, Victor Turner, who made a real study of the liminal stage, he suggests that the idea of being in a tunnel is a good description of what he terms the sort of hidden nature and mysterious darkness of a liminal phase. Developing this, Timothy Carlson describes the liminal state as a transitional one, the result of crossing a threshold between location, status, position, mental state, social condition, war and peace, illness or death. Those experiences, he says, can often be difficult and hard to understand. He says, feeling a loss of steady and familiar landmarks, the kind of security that accompany past structures. With everything in flux, angst becomes the predominant mood. Very often actions seem fruitless because some transitions can't be hurried. If we think about how people are at funerals or when they're grieving, I wonder whether that description of people feeling distressed, maybe chaotic or hopeless resonates with your experience of the bereaved, those who are attending funerals in some way, which again, sort of back to that question of who is a funeral for. I think one way of thinking and understanding rites of passage and rituals is that they provide a container for the distress and the chaos of change to be held in some sort of safe way. It doesn't mean that all of that disappears, but it can be contained. It gives it some sort of shape. And again, my experience of talking with people is often that after a funeral, they will say that they feel much better. Obviously, it hasn't taken away their loss. It hasn't solved their grief in one quick sort of stop. But it does mean that they've put a marker on their journey. It's given out a way to contain what's going on. And then the last little bit that I want to mention is another of Victor Turner's concepts, and that's what he terms as communitas. He describes this as the experience of those in the state of liminality. He suggests that in a transition from one position, structure, or status to another, there are moments when social structures such as class, education, employment, political affiliation disappear or are transcended, resulting in what he describes as a spontaneously generated relationship between leveled and equal, total and individuated human beings. Put in less convoluted language, what he's saying is that there is often a strong sense of unity that arises among ritual participants that transcends the daily differences of their social life elsewhere. And again, I wonder if you think about funerals that you've been to or attended, a sense of the connection that there can be and a mutuality between mourners who may well have come from many social different settings but are together in that place. Thinking about some of what you were sharing at the beginning, I think several of you talked about sort of senses of togetherness, whether that was in the singing or in the silence. So maybe that's aspects of that. And I guess, again, also with families, when we're supporting them, when thinking about a funeral, we all sometimes see that it's not always clear who's the sort of taking the lead, because they have had that sense of the previous sort of structures of how a family might have worked have now have been changed because they are in that liminal state of working out what's happening and where they're going to. I guess that's pretty much what I want to say. Yeah, I'll just add to that bit and my experience particularly supporting bereaved parents, is that there's often a quick bond formed with the parents. I don't know if that's the same in terms of taking other what we might think of as more sort of conventional funerals, but it may well be that even if it's just a short period of time, that we get drawn into that sense of being together with the bereaved in that sort of experience of communitas. They will often share with us very personal things that they might not have shared with other people, with other family. So we do get drawn into that experience with them, and it's perhaps just the sort of worth, as we're getting more into our funeral ministry, thinking about just thinking about what might be going on and how are people relating to us, and understanding and that they're perhaps relating to us in a particular way through a funeral that they wouldn't normally do outside of that. So those sort of bonds form quickly, but then also can quickly leave and return back to the old sort of ways of relating afterwards. Again, I will stop, and I realise that sort of last bits have been a little bit convoluted, but see if there are questions or if things I've said have made sense to you in that.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions? If you can raise a digital hand, I can't see everyone on the screen. Or if you finish your slides, Mark, you might want to back the screen. That's great. I mean, obvious question comes to my mind. You were that one of who's the funeral for? Is it a sense that it's for both the deceased and the bereaved equally? Is it in essence for both those two groups equally, or do you think it's more for one than the other? Or
it'd be interesting, Sarah, and your reflections on this as well. And my sense would be that that's perhaps changed over the last number of years. I suppose traditionally, a funeral would be about moving the deceased into whatever afterlife there would be. I think more recently, with the sort of telling of eulogies and things, then it's become much more about what are we doing to support the people who are grieving and about how we support their sort of the transitions that they're going to in terms of the loss that they're having. But yeah, it'd be interesting your and Sarah's reflections.
So it depends on whether the person who has died has requested anything in particular. But what I find really, from my experience, is the funeral is much more about the people that are grieving being able to have a space and a time for that passage from life to death, done in a ritualistic way that helps their grief. It's a stage of grief. And what I mean by that is I've had to help families where their loved one has chosen a direct cremation, for instance, and so they've not had any input into what happens after that person dies, where the body is then taken and cremated, and then they brought ashes back, and where either a whole family or people or a person has then really struggled in the grieving process because they haven't had that and I suppose that ritual, that what we're used to having in order to process the loss of a loved one, and being able to say those few precious words in a eulogy that quite often we help them write or they write themselves, but it's their words that essentially we've got the information from, in order to just celebrate them. And I think there's something really needed in that for people to grieve and move on with from having a body that's laid in a morgue that people are really conscious of this from somebody dying to where are they. A lady said to me last week that she couldn't sleep knowing that her son was laid at the undertaker's and she wanted to sit outside. Whereas now he's been cremated, now they've had the funeral, she's been able to let go of that. It's gone. The grief is still there and it's raw, but that thought of that physical body still being near her was so much to take. So and I have to say, I think that every time I take a funeral and visit a family, although what I'm asking for and the details I need may seem like I'm, if people like Simon comes with me now, there is a routine that I ask. I need information, but every single funeral is different, depending on, and so it should be, but it really is. So, and everything that we're saying and doing to help that family prepare a funeral is individual. Quite often families don't really have anything in mind as far as Bible passages and things are concerned. They want to leave that to me, or they want something that they've heard before. So it was unusual, the Bible passage that certainly you had, Kate. I thought it was a good one, by the way. So I think that's where, from my experience of it, is that a funeral, I've always said to my family, I don't care what you, I really don't care. I know where I'm off. Do what you like with me. Don't spend a lot of money and don't stand somewhere where my remains are crying. And, because my soul will be gone. And I suppose it doesn't matter that I say that, because if and when when my time comes, my family will need that point of doing the last thing that they can physically do for my body to honour me, I suppose.
Yeah,
So,
and sometimes there's a tension between what the deceased wanted and what the family want, which is quite an interesting one, I think.
yeah.
What do you do with that tension?
Well,
Anybody else? Anybody else want to chip in? Got a few more minutes and then we'll have a break. But yes, all the stuff that Mark's shared and so on. Anyone else comments, questions?
I was just thinking from what you were saying, Sarah, of that person who felt that they couldn't rest until so it's actually after the funeral. So in that sense, the funeral was doing the work of transferring the whether it's the body or the soul, which
Yeah.
transferring that person into that other state. So although they had died, although we might imagine that they were already there, it was only after the funeral had done that. So they needed a ritual
Yes.
to actually make that real or to make it happen.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Yeah, Keith Land. Yeah, you got a question? You have to unmute yourself there. I can't hear you, Keith. You need to click your unmute.
What Sarah was saying then, when I lost my wife 10 years ago, she went down the road to the local undertakers for just over 2 weeks. Every time I drove by or to the shops, I could shout, "Hi," because I knew where she was. I, again, didn't settle until the day that she arrived in the back of the hearse in the coffin. And then I knew then that she was on her way. But that in-between time, it was great to drive by and just shout, "Hi, I'm here. You all right?"
So that was an okay experience for you, was it? Because it sounds a bit strange.
Yeah, very, yeah.
But
at the end, when it came to the funeral, then that was the cut-off point then for me.
The transition thing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else comments or questions on all of this to chip in?
I think we had a funeral, and it was such a humbling sort of experience because it was a young lady who was very much revered in the animation world and everything. And we thought that the funeral was going to be quite small. How would we deal with that in church? There was going to be no hymns and everything. And it was a Polish family. And I thought, how can we do something for this person? Because mother and father couldn't speak English. And now the youngest daughter, who was only 17, she would have to translate everything. And I think sometimes you have to sort of think, what is the next step for us that sometimes we could do something? So I learned the Lord's Prayer in Polish. I couldn't do it without the words in front of me, but I transferred it all over and attempted it. And I think sometimes families appreciate that extra step that we do things in funerals and the care that we take. And I think that's where we as a church should shine more in what we do. That's me.
Interesting. Thank you, Sam. And so you managed to do that, did you?
It was brilliant.
Yeah, I don't know if I was brilliant, but yes, I did. And I felt something quite moving within that service for the whole thing. And then we went to the cemetery because it was a very different where the ashes arrived. We didn't have the body. The cremation had already taken place. We didn't quite understand whether that was part of the ritual of the Polish way of doing things. But then we carried the ashes into church and laid it on a table and everything. And then we went to the cemetery afterwards, which was a very moving piece. And there was a lot of young people there because she was only just over 30. And people who'd come from universities she'd been at, the places where she worked at, traveling all over the country and came to church. And it was just a very really moving service to take part in.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just thinking in relation to that, there's that, as you say, was that the way that they do it there? So again, we have our sort of rituals of how we understand how things are done in certain ways, and we expect things to sort of have a particular way round.
Yeah. And that was true. I mean, the mum. So mum couldn't. She couldn't she couldn't speak any Polish. Any English. I don't know a single word in Polish, so I found myself apologizing most of the time. But one thing her daughter was saying was that she wanted a traditional Catholic funeral. So and when I tried to drill that down a little bit, it was kind of lost in translation as to what that actually meant. They want how they do it in Poland, and I'm like, okay, so, and do I Google how they do it in Poland? How do we make it as authentic for them as possible? And it surprised, because when she was saying Catholic, I then wanted to make sure that they understood that I would be taking the funeral and I'm a woman. Are they okay with that? I really didn't know, and so we were lost in a little bit of translation. So, and we had about 3 lines of a eulogy, but this woman was incredible, but they just, it was because of the problem with the translation that mum just said she knew what she felt about her daughter, and she was too upset to kind of put that into words. So I Instagrammed this woman and found out about her and found all sorts of different things that people had written about her after she'd died. So just nabbed those and put them in. And Simon worked really hard. He spoke beautifully for the Lord's Prayer, which mattered. And we used the Simon's Other Bible passage as well, which is what they knew. So, and we did that as in the most traditional form possible, obviously not the original text, but more of a King James version than what we would normally use. Yeah. So it was trying to manage somebody else's expectation of whatever their ritual or tradition is. I'm sure we didn't get it completely right, but they were very thankful at the end. I felt like I needed to apologize because I didn't know if that's what, would help them in their grief process, but I think it did.
Yes, well,
Maybe-
navigating that extra dimension of language barrier is another whole aspect, isn't it? Which added a serious complexity to what you were trying to do there.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that sense of what I was sort of trying to get to with the Communitas stuff was that it feels like you and Simon, despite the language problems, actually there was this bond that rapidly developed between you and meant that you wanted to do something that was really meaningful, and even without the language, you were sort of drawn into.
Yeah, I mean,
the experience that they
Simon
were
had
going through.
looked into the Polish flower, and we made sure that next to her casket, the Polish, that so he'd looked into that, and so that was really quite lovely. And they mentioned candles, so we made sure a candle was lit next to the casket. So things that they would find rich, rich in ritual, whereas it's just trying to think out of the box, I suppose, in these things.
Yeah, and familiar symbolism and so on. Yeah. Thank you. Shall we have a pause there for a few minutes? Thank you for that. That's great. And then we'll go on to look at some of the practicalities of designing the service. And yes, if you can find your copy of the Common Worship materials in the 5-minute break, so you've got those handy, that could help us in the second half. So yeah, let's do 5 minutes and then reconvene. Recording again. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, over to you, Sarah.
So I don't know what you've got in front of you, but I'm looking at this. Has anybody got the funeral, Common Worship funeral?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keith is waving one. Yeah.
I don't know but don't worry if you haven't got one, because how I devised my funerals can be done with, even if you don't have this book, although I would recommend you get a book. There's this one as well. We can see that.
Yeah.
So I can have I'll just do this as if I'm doing one of, oh gosh, that's an awful, whoever's made me look really big on screen, that's horrendous.
That's me. You can blame me for
And I might just do that all the way through. So in this particular book is the structure of a funeral service. And I do have the Common Worship book, which you can have ribbons in and shows you where to go. Now, I found that quite hard doing a funeral that way, using a book like this, because it gives you or options for different prayers throughout the service. And I just found that I need to be able to see exactly what I'm doing, particularly when I'm wanting to get something perfectly right and not stumble on my words. So in this particular booklet, it will give you different ways of doing the gathering. So it gives you different verses from the Bible. I use one of them at a time, not all of them. And that goes with the introduction and the prayers. So what I've done over the year, what I started doing in my curacy actually, was I bought myself some little black A5 booklets, and I have literally printed off a funeral service, taking everything from here. So it's using the correct liturgy that we need to prepare that service. And then I have several of these. So I'll have, so I've got different options, different Bible readings, depending on what people are wanting. And then I also make sure that they're correct for whatever type of service I'm taking. So it might be that the funeral is directly at the crematorium, so the wording is slightly different. It may be that it's in church and then I go for a burial. It may be in church and then go into the crematorium where the committal is there. So I found that really helpful for me, so that I can prepare each funeral with a book, and I use little tabs to then write the person's name in on every page. I've got a little part of the page so that in everywhere through it. Thankfully, so far, and I've done a lot of funerals, I've never actually got the name wrong. Now, you could actually just print off that every time, so insert the name and do it on computer, but I have too many funerals to do that. I felt like I was just shredding paper all the time. So that's the way that I find really helpful. So the common worship pattern that it gives you, the funeral preparation and how to put the service together, is not something that you have to think of yourself. It's all there for us in common worship. Now, when I actually did that, I went through that with my incumbent at the time, just to check that I'd not missed anything out and everything looked okay. I have it, so everything that I have in here when I'm taking a funeral, I know that everything that's in these pages, on every page I am saying. So there's no doubt for me as to which, I don't have to see and or options. I've chosen my options already as to what prayers I want to use and how that will look. And what's different for every funeral is whatever Bible passage the family want. So, and sometimes they don't always know that, but so I leave a space in my book to make sure that I can put the correct Bible passage in, and then the sermon. I don't really do a sermon. I call it a reflection, but I do then a reflection based on that Bible passage and the person. And then because these little I'm not getting any money for this, telling you about these little A4 booklets, but there's space in the back then to put your eulogy that you write, if you're doing that for the family. And this is my favorite, but I've found some more. Mark's just put something in the chat comments as well, but I've got all of these that I write in. It is so helpful. And because I can quite often, I have had 8 funerals lined up on my desk. So, and thankfully I've got 10 of these booklets. So I'm able to then put the name of the deceased on the front, the day of the funeral, they're in order. And I know that the correct liturgy is going to be right wherever that funeral is taking place. And for me, that works really well. And I didn't have to, the common worship gives us, and we're all different, aren't we? So there'll be, and Simon's with me at the moment. And, although he's hearing how I have structured the funeral, as long as we stick with the Church of England liturgy, actually it's so rich with different options that you can use that might feel, I have done it on an iPad, Kate, but on a couple of occasions, my iPad played me up. And so in the end, I thought, I'm not doing this anymore. So I just don't use my iPad. I used it for sermons and things before. And for me personally, I found that the printed sheets are much better for me, looking at it in a booklet in order. But obviously I see people use iPads all the time, and I can recommend it for some. It doesn't work for me because I'm dyslexic, so using this particular style that I do means I'm using the same text that's written. It's very clear for me. I don't have anything flashing on my screen. Even the light on the screen has to be right if I'm reading from the screen. So for me, this is the way that I would do it. And read through the different prayers in this book. And because, as I say, there's a lot of awe. So whichever one feels more natural for you to say, I suppose, is the, Mark might be able to allude on that a little bit, but for me, it was what I felt right in my theology to actually say naturally. Do you know, one of the things that I struggled with was using words and terminology that I thought people would find
difficult.
harsh or alarming. So, for instance, so Bill, can you cut this out if I'm being a heretic? All right.
I'm sure I can, yeah.
If not a heretic, if I'm breaking canon law. Obviously,
Oh.
I never break canon law.
You're among friends, don't worry.
Yeah. So for instance, Mark, theologically, you might be able to come in with something with this, but I found we use the word the Lord loves those who fear him. So in the context where I am, I looked at people's faces and thought to myself, what are they thinking when I say that? Fear the Lord. What is it going through their minds? So I've changed the word fear to love, to those that love the Lord. And for me, loving the Lord is fearing the Lord. That's what we mean. But I found using, depending on where I was, that really fitted better. So but I've never really asked. I've never really found out if anybody else does that. That just felt right for me after looking at the word fear and how it was translated, and what does that mean? So I wouldn't recommend changing liturgy, but
I would say Canon B5 is your friend.
yes.
Canon B5 says the minister who is to conduct the service may, in his discretion, but that's obviously they need to update the canons, may in their discretion make and use variations which are not of substantial importance in any form of service authorized by Canon B1 according to particular circumstances.
Thank you, Mark. You're so clever. So what Mark said, and that felt very right for me to do that, and that was how I felt in my theology and how I wanted to, for people who, and a lot of the funerals that we do are people that don't go to church, but I wanted them to understand the love of God rather than the fear of God. So and that's why I love common worship for that, because we have so many options. Strangely enough, well, it's probably not strange, but throughout my training, we were always encouraged to use the contemporary Lord's Prayer, but I never do at a funeral. I always use the traditional, and because I think that's what people expect. I suppose it's a ritual thing again, Mark. If I was to use the contemporary, even if they don't know it, they know that that's not the one that they know.
Mm-hmm.
But putting a service together, there's lots of help on the Church of England website. I'm happy to share any of these, because obviously what I've done is I've printed these off, and I've got these on my computer that'll say creme only, church and creme. But remember, it'd be really helpful for you to do it yourself, in order for you to be able to flow through that service. It'll feel so natural. And equally, some of you may do it straight from one of these books, because you're comfortable doing that, and you might tab on the pages and go backwards and forwards. I just don't find that helpful for me. So I just wondered, are there any questions from anybody?
I was asking about the book you were waving there, just that blue one. Is that the joint, the sort of the one that's used for different denominations and so on?
Yeah, it is. It says common worship inside, but it says churches in England. But yes, I personally have never used this, but it was given to me when I was training. So I just didn't know if anybody else had it, but it does tell you inside which has come from what bits are common worship, which are are sort of and I don't know. There is the BCP funeral service as well, but I don't use that. just because I think some of the language is it's tricky for me to say, let alone anybody else listening. So so I haven't used anything from that. It was just given to me and I saw it on the shelf, so I wondered if anybody else have it. I've used only the liturgy from Common Worship.
Yeah, I think when I was first ordained, there was a green book at the Crem, which was kind of interdenominational and was kind of agreed by churches together as suitable for all of us. But that may have moved on now, and that was before the Common Worship one was established.
Yeah, quite possibly, because this wasn't before the Common Worship one, because it has Common Worship in it, but I don't actually use it. It was given to me quite a while ago. So and actually to make your own booklets, if you like, it's all there on the Church of England website. So it was quite easy for me to take that information and put it in and make a booklet out of it.
Yes, you can cut and paste from that quite easily, can't you?
So easy. It was really easy to do. So, and I could make sure that it was correct and followed the correct order. I was using the right liturgy at the right time of the service.
Thank you. Joseph, you've got a hand raised. You want to chip in there?
Yep. So my question is specifically the funeral ministry one, is it much different from the pastoral services book?
No, so I've got that book as well, Joseph. But now, so that's the book that I was saying. You can use that, and you'd have to use your tabs. You know, your ribbons, or you use tabs from going from page to page. So, and for me, that was just not flowing. I couldn't do that. It wasn't flowing right for me, because you know, you might lose your tab out, or and my brain couldn't just. Although, to be honest, I'd loved it. I love using the book. I love the feel of the book. So that's why you know, these A5 binders are much better than. I would never have a piece of paper. I want something that looks tidy and smart. And also with these, it doesn't matter what the weather's doing. I have stood at many gravesites where they've got soaking wet, but it doesn't matter because they're waterproof. So your book
that was something I noticed this morning.
Yeah.
I was like trying to hover over and protect my book.
And the paper in those books are quite thin, aren't they? And they're beautiful. So that the same liturgy will be in that book that is in here.
Okay, it's the same.
But there'll be a lot more information in your book, and then you'll go to the back. I think it'll give you all the psalms and things like that, does it? So you'd be going from
it doesn't give the psalms, because I was looking for.
You'd be going from one part of the book then to another, so you would need to tab it to make sure you knew exactly what you were doing. Otherwise, you'll be flicking backwards and forwards. And as I say, for me, that, and there's the and or, you'll see that in there.
Yeah.
So two options. And I just didn't want to, for my brain not to be overloaded, it was much better for me to choose the passage, you know, to choose the bit of liturgy rather than have an option. And I can change it. I can have different variations in each of the books. So you can swap it up a little bit if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the overall structure, looking at the website there, just the basic thing of there's a structure to start you off with. So you've got the gathering, readings and sermon, prayers, commendation, committal. So that's quite useful as a initial orientation of the shape of a service, isn't it? And then you can work out your own personal and choices.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I did. So when looked at the structure, followed that. So I knew that, you know, my service was actually in the correct shape and form that you would expect a Church of England service. You know, because it does need to be. We do need to make sure we're using the right liturgy.
Other questions, comments? Anybody want to chip in there? What else do you want to talk about? Kate, you've got a one.
You're on muted, Kate.
You've double clicked.
So, I've got this book. But there's nothing in here about funerals at all.
No, that's
the wrong one.
common worship for other,
So-
for sort of Sundays mainly, that one, isn't
Yeah,
it?
so I think it was a bit vague with the common worship. As somebody who's not a leader or a reader of any kind in church, I was like, I borrowed this one, but I didn't really know what book it was I was supposed to be looking for.
So that must be your Sunday services. So you see, and your seasons is in there.
It's got baptisms and it's
but
got all sorts in it, but it hasn't got anything about funerals. So
Yes, it's a bit confusing because it's all under the umbrella of common worship, but as you say, it's
Yeah.
not all in that one book.
So I was just wondering if maybe you could put a link to the actual book we want into the email with the slides.
Well, that was the one I sent you, the
Because
reminder
that
one.
just took me to the website, which is great. But if I wanted a physical book to
I see.
actually have in my hand,
Yes,
it's
it's probably.
knowing.
you need to go to Church House Publishing really and just get that. I mean, this booklet itself, they're like less than £2.
No, they're not.
They're £6.99 now, Sarah. I spotted them earlier.
You're out of date.
I got mine.
Curious enough, I have actually got a few copies of that because I recently, with the Church Army Library closing down in Sheffield, I went and did a bit of a raid, bought a few books, and I've managed to get 3 copies. I'll bring them to the next of our days together, which is in March, which will be available. But yeah, I think the basic point is if you might need to go to Church House Publishing, which is also on the CAV website. I think if you put in funeral service.
Mark's done that. He's put it on for you.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, there you go. That's the
But
link.
that's the pastoral services one, isn't it? And then we've just got the funeral booklet as well, so that's helpful. But as I say, you don't even need to buy a book. Just you can take it from the Church of England website. So you don't actually need one at all if you don't want to get somebody to buy you one as a present.
The pastoral services has a wider set of services.
Yes.
So it's got the funeral ministry stuff, but it's also got things for services for home visits.
Yeah.
It's got a range of other sort of related things for sort of visiting in hospital, etc., etc. I'm not sure what the funeral one's got in, but I assume it's just got a smaller selection of things that are particularly just related.
Yeah, that link you put in, Mark, at the bottom of that, it gives you some other things you might like, and one of those is the funeral booklet. So this is the kind of stuff to ask parishes to buy you really as part of this course. Because this is essential equipment, basically.
And I imagine you'd find them secondhand in places as well if you looked on.
Yeah. Well, I'll certainly bring along those few that I found at the Church Army, and those could be up for grabs this time. Is that Elizabeth? Are you wanting to make a question? Were you waving at us? No, you weren't. Okay, right. That's all right. No problem. Other people, questions, comments. What else do people want to talk about in all this?
I would just say, in terms of thinking about sort of structure, and this goes back to some of the sense of ritual, having a structure. So a service has a structure, and the Church of England has its expectations of how it will go, and that's helpful because actually that's going to shape things for you. So about how we get people into the church and how we get people out of the church and what people are expecting. So we know that the commendation, that's always going to come towards the end of the service, because again, then people know, and just sometimes little things. So I generally will ask people to stand when we come to the commendation, because it feels, again, it's sort of a ritual action, but when we stand up, something important happening. So sort of invitation for that. But yeah, I would echo exactly what Sarah was saying, and I imagine perhaps if Sarah went back to the first time she put one of those booklets together and looked at the prayers that she used then and now looks what's in there now, it would have shifted. And again, I look back at some of the services that I did historically and think, oh my goodness, did I really use that prayer? But it's about finding stuff that works with your integrity. You feel comfortable saying. So the research I did with bereaved parents, they all talked about how lovely the services were. And I would look at the services that some of my sort of chaplain colleagues had done, and again, I would think, oh my goodness, it's like I could have never said that. But because it was said with an integrity of the person, and that's what comes across. It's the relating well.
Yeah.
That's really important.
And what I found as well, in the way that I put these services together is because I've done it, I don't stumble. The words are much, you know, you get used to the structure because you've done it, you've put it together, you know, and as time goes on, you become more confident. I mean, you know, I often, I wouldn't dare do it without the booklet, by the way. I've done hundreds of funerals. I still would have to use it, but it's there more of a comfort blanket, I suppose, now, because I don't need to stare at it because I'm so, you know, I know what's coming next. I used to worry that when I first started thinking, well, people know that I'm just doing the same thing every time. So I did change up some of the sermons and things like that, but actually people don't know. And actually that is the ritual of a funeral. These, you know, the ashes to ashes words that we use, dust to dust, they're in every funeral I've ever done, you know. So there was just one time a family asked me not to say those words because they found them too upsetting. So I just went into common worship to think, okay, so am I allowed not to put those in? How do I, you know, I just make sure that I'm covering myself all the time whilst trying to honour what a family lasts for. And is that coming up? Are we talking about family being involved as well?
Yes, we'll go on to that in a minute. Just going on to that thing about repetition, I think the significant thing is the way it becomes very personal is the stuff about the individual, isn't it?
Yes.
So I think if the structure is familiar, you know, if people think, oh, I've heard Sarah use this structure before, that doesn't matter, because when you talk about the person, it becomes unique and individual. So that's the sort of tension, isn't it?
Yeah, the music's always different. Obviously it's all, you know, very different. So yeah. Absolutely.
Kate's putting the rest there.
I find that the booklets that we are using and that Sarah's style for me works really, really well, because I think if you've got the book and you have to move from one page back to another, it doesn't look as though you've got continuity. Whereas the book you're following, and if you get familiar, you can actually address the people that are sat in the pews and have come to the funeral. It looks as though you're still addressing them rather than your head down trying to read the. To me, I always revert back to scripts because I deal with theatre, so it's like the congregation becomes an audience, and you're reading off that. And I think if you're so familiar because it's your style, how you've picked it up, then that comes over really natural to the congregation, the funeral people that have come in. I think they feel comfortable and relaxed more in that situation as they come in when they're in church. I think that really helps as far as I can see when we're using those A5 booklets.
Yeah, thank you, Simon.
Sorry, just something else to mention there as well. And as you work with different funeral directors, I don't need to say to any of the funeral directors now what my structure will look like for an order of service. They're aware of how you know, that I sent them a structure of a funeral and said, this is how all my funerals will be structured. The difference is the hymn, the music, the Bible reading, because we don't put the tribute in there. But this, and so that was really helpful for all the different funeral directors, and we work really well together because they can start preparing an order of service before I've even visited the family, because they know how it's going to start to look. So that, you know, that continuity is really good for, you know, in so many different ways.
Yeah. You've mentioned tribute there, and it's interesting looking at the structure we're given. It says a tribute or tributes may be made. So that's one of the optional, and it's singular or plural. So there could be more than one voice doing a tribute, or the old speaker's the eulogy, isn't it? So maybe if we just move on to thinking a bit about that, and how we do those parts of the service, so that it could well be something about the deceased, a eulogy, a tribute, and also sometimes family may offer or ask to bring a poem or a piece of music, or for one of them or more than one of them to do the eulogy. So maybe we can just explore that territory a bit. Is that something we simply go with, or are we cautious about, or very happy about? That whole thing of involving the family and of speaking about the individual. Perhaps, I mean, Sarah, Mark, why don't you both chip in on that, and then we'll see what other people have to share as well.
So before I visit the family, of course, I don't know what they're going to want. So that's the question that I will ask at a funeral visit.
Mm.
And but when I ring a family to arrange a visit, one of the things I'll always say to them is maybe have a think about the things that you're wanting to say about so and so, because that's the sort of thing we'll be talking about when I come to visit you. So you could make some notes if you want to, or we can do it together when I come. So it just, because what I've often found is I never used to give prompts like that, but then I'd get there and they'd go, oh, I've not really thought about that, and it's all over the place. Or it can appear to be. So you're making notes and you're going back from one thing to another, and that's okay, because I've learned how to then restructure all of those notes into a eulogy. But it just helps them. I'm always conscious that people are then trying to give you so much information that they then forget some stuff that they really want to write. So give them a bit of space and time to think about what your visit is going to be for. So and so I always ask them to think about that. I don't worry about the Bible passage, because most of the time people want me to help them with that.
Yeah.
So I usually take 3 examples and say, would you do you want something that you'll know? Well, I don't know the Bible. I'll say, well, you will know this one. Even though you don't know the Bible, you've probably heard this particular Bible passage. Psalm 23, for instance, is a really popular because people know it. And it's not, we're not reading a piece of scripture that they've never heard before, and it's alien to them. So for the tribute, I go prepared to write notes. So I take a notebook and pen with me. And sometimes there's 10 people in a room, and sometimes there's 1. Sometimes it's like getting blood out of a stone, and then within 10 minutes you can't stop anybody talking. So there is a bit of a knack to it, I suppose, and you'll learn your natural way of bringing the family back together so that we can keep continuing. Do you know, I've been to Simon and I have done a funeral visit today, and this is unusual, but Simon and I have done a visit today, and they have literally given me the eulogy all written up.
Right, I was going to ask you about that. Yes, that's. So are they planning to speak that on the day, or do they want you to
read it on the day? They've done it. I always ask for a copy if anybody's already done it, even if they're reading it. Not because I want to ask them to take anything out, but because I want to know about this person. And so I want to have a sense of who they are. So even if I'm not writing the eulogy, I like to see it so that I get a sense of who they are. Equally, if the person that's reading it really is not able to do it on the day, I'm following it with them, so I can stand up and I'm right next to them, and I can help them. Yes,
because that's often something, if they just sort of lose it in the emotion halfway through, you can carry it on to the end. I think that can be very helpful.
So this is amazing to get this in this form is rare, I have to say. And I come away thinking, wow, there must be about 2 or 3 hours of work that I've just got away with not having to do there. So so it's quite nice, actually. Otherwise, I will find myself taking lots of notes, and nobody would be able to understand them in a million years, but I kind of have learned to do that. That's where an iPad might come in handy, Kate.
What about sort of length? Do you go for about like 6 or 7 minutes, or what's
do you know what I'm very careful to do with people is I say to them, no tribute is too short, and it's rare that I've ever had a tribute that is too long, and I would never ask them to cut out. So I would look at how we can fit that in, because
I
it's
think
really
the issue
important.
there can be if three of the family all want to give a tribute, then you can have issues with the length, can't you? And that may need a bit of negotiating, perhaps.
So it's only really been on a couple of occasions where I've thought, oh my goodness, they've brought extra with them, because
Right.
that can happen. So and that is a particular problem if you go into the crematorium afterwards.
You've got
If it's
limited
burial
times.
afterwards, it's okay.
You've got to watch the clock a bit.
So when I do the visit, if they are doing if they're doing the tribute and they're going to send it me later to read, say, I do say to them, because we're going to the crematorium, we do need, can you just practice and make sure, it doesn't go over 20 minutes, because that's a long time to talk, because that could cause problems at the crematorium. Equally, I know the crematorium is quite a short part of the service, and we always book they always book a full slot. So it's handy to know what your funeral director, how they book that. So I know that we've got plenty of time. And thankfully, I think one funeral I've taken has only ever gone over once at a crematorium, and that was only by about 5 minutes. So it's never really been a huge problem. I mean, most of them I have written, so I'm able to
Know
make
how long it's going to be.
Yeah.
Mark, you want to chip in anything here of your experience of the tribute eulogy thing?
Yeah, I don't think I've got an awful lot more to add from what Sarah said. Most of the funerals I've done have been of babies, so it's a different thing, because you've not really got a eulogy, because one of the things that you're saying is, I often talk about the difference between an adult funeral and a baby funeral is that we have the love but not the story to wrap around the love in quite the same way, because there isn't a story to tell of the life that's been lived, and that's the sadness of the funeral. I think some of there will be similar things of just think, so if someone said, like, I'd like these 5 pieces of music played, and you're sort of saying, well, just sort of like, do you really want to be sat there for half an hour or however long it's going to take? So having people have an awareness of how long things take can be helpful. I think thinking back to when I have taken adult funerals, asking for a family tree can be really helpful, just so you can get clear who the children are, who grandchildren are, and things like that. So to get a shape of who's around.
Yes, because that's quite important. So if you mention, I know in the prayers I used to mention close family, those who particularly feel the loss of so and so, but then the fear is, I missed out anybody important? So having that family tree from them is good.
I avoid that in the prayers where I feel where there's a lot of family members and I'm worried about missing them. I mean, usually big families around here where they've got a lot of siblings and had a lot of children and got loads of grandchildren. So, but it's one of the questions. So it's good to go. Take a list of questions with you. You wouldn't fly through them like you were interrogating them, but always make sure you've got the proper pronunciation of the name, but actually what did they call them? Because don't assume that somebody called Jane Smith, she might have been called Sandra her entire life. So I always make sure I'll say, what do I call her or him? What would you like me to say during the day? So that's the first thing. I always check the time and the date, by the way. That's the first thing I ever do, is check that we've got the right details of the funeral, because there has been times when the funeral director has not told me that there's been a change of time or whatever. So always good to check that. So always check. Sorry.
I was just going to say, sometimes even and again, you have to judge it a bit, but it can just bring a little bit of humor in and say, like,
Yeah.
just want to check you've got the same time, because it really is good that we all turn up to the same place, and that can just lighten the mood and things. And
Yeah.
I guess thinking back to what I was saying about ritual and of the sort of rites of passage and liminal thing, as Sarah was saying, you can go and people can be all over the place because they don't know really what to do. Sometimes they may have never been to a funeral, but I know they've certainly never been to a funeral for this person, so their life has never been affected in that way. And you go and you give them that safe container for it, because you go and say, it's all right, I can hold this. I know what I'm doing, even if it
Yeah.
doesn't really feel like you do, but because you go with questions and you can, and that's it's the beauty in a sense of the Church of England having a formal liturgy.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't have to work to think about, oh, what am I going to do here? It's all there, and it just.
I say that at just about every funeral. You don't need to worry about anything on the day, because you can leave the service to me. I know what I'm doing, and you just need to be on the day. Don't worry about when you come in, when you sit down, what you're supposed to. You don't need to do anything. You just need to be and be with your mother.
Yes,
And
I always remember telling wedding couples that as well, a similar sort of anxiety. Mark, just going back to choices of music, do you ever think, oh heck, I'm not sure that piece of music is going to be a good one? I mean, music's very emotive, for better and for worse. And yeah, do you ever have any reservations, or do you just go with what they ask because the family are asking for it?
I've never had anything where I've thought, I'm not sure about that. I remember Michael Perham, who wrote lots of the common worship stuff, doing a talk at Theological College, and he said he never allows people to have Sinatra, I Did It My Way, because it had the line, regrets, I've had a few, but then too few to mention, and he thought that's bad theology. And a funeral is a penitential rite. At least it was in his view. And again, with the baby funerals, when people have music, I always listen to it through before, because I want to know what it's saying, and there's often lines that I can take from it that I can weave in elsewhere. I think it's worth reflecting, sort of, because sometimes again you can use music instead of hymns, but also what are people coming in and out to, and you do hear of people leaving the cremation to I'm a fire starter from the
awful.
You probably don't want Colours of Day necessarily sung, or at least to be aware that if you are, you've got the chorus, light up the fire, let the flame burn, and just sort of have an awareness of those things.
Yes, it's difficult. I think I've only once had one. The end of a service as we came out, they'd asked for Queen, The Show Must Go On, and the problem was it's kind of Freddie Mercury raging against the dying of the light. He knows he's dying. He can't do anything about it. The show must go on. But it's there's a lot of angst, a lot of hopelessness in that song. And the family, they didn't just cry, they howled. And I just thought,
I don't think it's the words though. I don't think songs like that, it's about the words for people. It's about the familiarity of a tune, and it puts them in a time and space. So what I say to people is, because I download all of the music for church, so if it's not an organist, so I know exactly what's going to be played, and the only thing that I say to people is, if it was explicit, if it had swearing in it, that would be a no-no for me. But that really is, nobody's ever asked me to play anything that has made me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've done a funeral before where I had to download the music to Bluey, the cartoon. And at first I thought, well, that's going to be so strange, but for the family, that was so important. So, it's about making sure if any of the secular music could, theologically just not make any sense whatsoever, but if if it comforts the family.
Yes, I think my issue with the Queen was it didn't comfort them. It just sort of sent them into a dark place, and that was my regret about it. It wasn't so much the words, but the effect it had on them just made me think. Which there were times going on. Questions, comments for other people from all this stuff, practical stuff. Let's have a few more questions, comments. What do people want to ask about and explore some more? We've got a question from Kate's cat, perhaps, if he's still around. I don't know.
No, he's gone now. He'd knocked my pen off the table and then went chasing it out the room.
Okay, well,
I was going to ask though a practical thing about where you actually put the eulogy in, because I've seen different funerals and they've put it in different points of the service. Julie, that I do most of the funerals with, puts it in quite early because she feels like that's what everybody's come for. And they're kind of going to be sat on their edges of the seat until they've listened to that and they can't start to relax and let go. But I've also had people have it like quite near the end. So I just wondered what your kind of feelings were on that, really.
Yeah, just looking at the common worship material, it recommends fairly early on, before readings and sermon and prayers. Actually, when I was my training incumbent, I used to put it in the prayers. We're going to remember the life of so and so as we give thanks for the life, and I actually bring it in the prayers there, which was his way of doing it. What about Sarah, Mark? What do you think of that?
So I do the gathering and prayers, and then I do the eulogy. So very near the beginning, particularly if family are wanting to read it, because it gives them the rest of the service to just sit. If they're reading it, or they might not be reading it, but they know it's coming. And I find then that the rest of the service, particularly because they've had the eulogy, with then going into prayers and Bible passage and reflection, they're a bit more settled.
Yeah.
So I always do it. I've always done it in the same place near the beginning.
Near the beginning. That's interesting. What about you, Mark?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think, and again, it goes back to a bit about what I was saying about who's a funeral for. Historically, it was only about transferring the soul of the deceased, or wherever, in whichever sort of, certainly a Church of England perspective. So you look at common worship, so you look at the Book of Common Prayer, there is no eulogy. It is just the sermon. And so I think having an extended eulogy is something that's much more modern. Even probably 30, 40 years ago, there might not have been very much, or it was sort of, we said a few words in the prayers. So I think earlier on works better, as Sarah said, just for that process of people feeling relaxed into it. Also in theory, again, if you're thinking about the funeral being about transferring this person into somewhere else, the eulogy is not doing that. That's about paying tribute to them. So you sort of do that, and then the rest of the funeral, in a sense, can now do its bit.
Yeah.
Because the eulogy is about thinking about the person in the present, and we're looking back, whereas actually the rest of the funeral is then about moving them, sort of looking forward. In fact, my dad, who's a reader, sometimes actually, in terms of introducing a funeral, welcoming people at the beginning, will sort of say this sort of comes in two halves. The first part is as we're looking back on the life that's been led, and the second half is about moving them, commending them to God and their life that they're now going to. And then the sermon, in that sense, can actually help as a sort of the bit that bridges between the two, because that's where you can make reference. And I think even if someone's written a eulogy, whether they're saying it or you're saying it, it's actually quite nice to try to pick up a few bits and pieces that they might not have said or echo that you can put into a sermon, which again just makes it help feel personalized for people. But that again, that starts to move you into that second part of, and now we're actually, we are commending this person to God's keeping, we're moving them to the heavenly realm, or however it is that our theology works in that way.
Thank you. Time's almost up. Just a brief one from Simon Carr.
Hi, yeah. I've just recently done my first eulogy and visited a family, and it was a family member. And I don't know if anybody else on the course at the moment, but I think the part of the training that I've really found very, very useful is the fact of how Sarah brings wherever we go to visit back to the actual service and what we need the information from. And I think if I was first doing it, I'd come away with like half of the information and thinking, whoa, I need to do another visit because of. And I think that's a really good thing, that we need to learn how much information we actually receive from a family and in what order we can put it, but also the important bits and the relevance about checking people's names. Because there was a girl and it was Siobhan, and I'm thinking, if I spell it wrong way, I will say it wrong in my eulogy. And so it's, how do you say that, and ask them. And I found that really, really useful in that training session that I went on. Just as a note.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll all have different ways of doing it. And certainly when I was working as a curate, my training incumbent had a sort of pro forma, because there were the things that he wanted to know for the church, but actually had useful questions about thinking about music in, music out, how many people. So you can create a sort of form that you print out for each funeral, where you've got the key details and then space to sort of jot those things down as you're going through to catch the bits that you might want to put into a eulogy, or just again trying to get that understanding of the family.
That's certainly something I did to start off with. I don't need to do that so much now because I've done it so, but I always take the funeral, the A5 book that I have that I'm gonna use for that funeral. I take that with the visit with me. So that's now part of what would any notes I make, anything about that person, all goes into that booklet. So it's all in one place. Poems, if they want poems, anything goes into there, and it keeps it really neat and tidy. But yeah, I used to do that when I first started, print off, and I can send you I can send that to you, Bill, or Mark, you probably got it, but where you can use that when you first go on visits. As I say, after quite a lot, I know now what I need to ask. So I do it, but I don't need that anymore. So
thank you. Let's just draw to a close, and then I'll read one prayer from the funeral liturgy, and maybe after that, Sarah, why don't you lead us in the traditional Lord's Prayer? I'll mute everybody so it won't be too chaotic, but if you can lead us in that just to close with. But let's a moment of quiet just to reflect on tonight's learning, and especially what's the most important part of the learning tonight that we want to keep hold of. And here's one of the prayers, one of the options in the funeral service. Almighty God, you judge us with infinite mercy and justice, and love everything you've made. In your mercy, turn the darkness of death into the dawn of new life, and the sorrow of parting into the joy of heaven. Through our Saviour, Jesus Christ. Amen.
You can say together.
Yeah.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, for ever and ever. Amen.